Thanks for coming along today, and welcome everyone online as well. So before I introduce Nicola, we'll just do a little bit of housekeeping. So we're recording today. Oh, the video. I better put our video on. That's a good idea so people can see Nicola give the talk. Thanks. Okay, don't do that. Video off today. So it'll be recorded. If there are any emergencies, our evacuation area is just out on the grass. And if you need bathrooms, they're just under the stairs out here. And there's morning tea after today up in yellow too, so you can follow everyone, and that's at 10:30, and everyone's welcome. I think that's it for housekeeping. So thank you, Nicola, for coming to give a talk. Nicola is a postdoc research fellow here at RIEL at CDU, and her research focuses on the ecology and conservation of threatened bats, particularly the ghost bat. And in today's talk, she has promised me multiple photos of ginger ghost bats, which she assures me are genetically superior and will one day take over the world with her help. So, is she a hero or is she a villain? Maybe today we'll find out. Thank you, Nicola.
Thank you, Christina. Hi, everybody. I fear Christina may be slightly disappointed by the number of ginger ghost bats included in the presentation, but let's see how we go. Yeah, thank you to everybody in the room and online that has come to listen to my talk on the Macroderma Initiative, which is a new program that we've started here at RIEL. And I'm going to talk about how we're trying to conserve ghost bats in a changing landscape. First, I want to acknowledge the Larrakia people as the traditional owners of the country on which I work and where we gather today, and pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. I also acknowledge that the traditional owners and custodians of the many countries across the top end on which this work takes place, and their continuing connection to lands, waters, and communities. So ghost bats are the last living Australian representatives of a lineage that has been present on the continent for millions of years. But the landscapes they now occupy look very different to those that their ancestors experienced due to human-driven landscape changes. So ghost bats are now navigating a world where both shelter and food resources are changing. And we're trying to make conservation decisions in that changing world, often without basic information that we need to have on population dynamics, on movement, on habitat use, and ecology. So meet the ghost bat, Macroderma gigas, the species formerly known as the false vampire bat. It's had a rebrand in the last decade or so. The ghost bat is endemic to Northern Australia, with its closest living relatives in Asia and Africa. They produce echolocation, like many bats, and so this is when they produce pulses of sound and listen for returning echoes to help them navigate and locate prey in the dark. They're Australia's largest echolocating bat with a wingspan of up to 70 centimeters and a weight of 100 to 150 grams. And so this makes them much closer in size to a smaller flying fox than it would be to the smaller insect-eating bats that you might be familiar with seeing under different streetlights. And they're also the third largest echolocating bat in the world. Ghost bats are unmistakable in appearance. They have pale, ghostly fur and thin, translucent wings, which is where this common name of the ghost bat comes from. In some regions, including around Catherine, we also see these beautiful rufous-colored or ginger individuals, Christina. They have enormous ears, a large large nose leaf, and distinctive puckered lips, giving them one of the most recognizable faces of any of the Australian bats. Ghost bats are a cave-dependent roosting species, and their distribution is strongly influenced by the availability of suitably warm and humid and stable subterranean roosts. So they use underground structures across a range of geologies, including limestone caves and sinkholes, some of which are basically invisible from the surface, but form these extensive cave systems below the ground. They also roost in sandstone caves, such as the cave at Tullamore Falls, which you may have visited from the lookout. And ghost bats definitely know how to pick like a really picturesque spot to roost in. In Queensland, they're also known from these giant granite boulder formations where the gaps between these massive boulders form these complex kind of cave-like systems. So while ghost bats aren't especially fussy about the geology that they roost in, they are much more selective about the microclimate of the roost. And this is particularly important for permanent roosts and maternity roosts. So they tend to be found in roosts that range from 23 to 28 degrees Celsius and 50 to 90% relative humidity. They may use sites that have less ideal conditions, but these tend to support smaller groups, are used for more short-term periods or used for dispersing across the landscape rather than for large permanent maternity colonies. And so a lot of this talk will focus on how human-driven landscape changes can remove habitat, can fragment habitat, or make things more dangerous for the ghost bats to move across the landscape. But ghost bats have also taken advantage of some disturbances. So from the late 1860s and early 1870s, underground mining expanded rapidly across northern Australia, first targeting gold and then moved into tin mining, copper, some other minerals. And miners, including European miners and Chinese miners, followed these quartz veins and different seams, and then often digging these holes by hand. These workings include vertical shafts, these horizontal shafts, which are known as adits, declines, and then sometimes these meet up with kind of larger stopes or caverns inside the mine. And so many of these mining areas were explored and reworked and closed over time. But ghost bats have actually found that these meet their requirements in terms of temperature and humidity, and are dark, safe, and have that correct microclimate. So while mining has caused these major impacts to ghost bats, some abandoned mines have also become important roosting habitat. And this is especially true in the Pine Creek region, which is just a couple of hours south of us here. And in fact, Cohenor Adit, which is the one that's pictured here, is one of the roosts in Pine Creek. This houses the largest known colony of ghost bats in the world. Ghost bats are remarkably efficient predators. They hunt using a three-pronged sensory system. So they use echolocation, acute hearing, and excellent eyesight. Their diet is largely insectivorous and includes large insects such as yellowing locusts, but they also commonly take a range of vertebrate prey, including birds, reptiles, frogs, small mammals, and even other bats. They can take prey up to their own body weight and have been recorded taking prey as large as red-coloured lorikeets. So yeah, they can be pretty ferocious predators. Rather than chasing prey through the air continuously, like some of the smaller insectivorous bats, because that's often used as perch and ambush strategy. So they hang from a tree or a tall shrub, and then they watch and listen for movement on the ground or in the surrounding trees. So they might take, a grasshopper from a tree trunk, a communally roosting bird from a branch, or a bat from the air. And then they will, swoop down from their tree, land on top of the animal, and then with a swift bite to the neck, quickly incapacitate their prey. And often the only evidence of a meal is what the ghost bat leaves behind. So they tend to discard wings and tails and feet, fur and feathers beneath a feeding perch. And here is a quick video from captivity, which shows how they can land on top of prey, which is a dead mouse here, and then use their strong forearms to pop back up off the ground. So now I've kind of told you how ferocious they are. I need to bring you back and also let you know that they're equally enigmatic. Ghost bats are an incredibly social species. They can live in colonies ranging from a couple of individuals to over 1,000 individuals. At Cohenor Adit, which I mentioned earlier, counts of up to 1,700 individuals have been recorded roosting together. So going back to the ferocious thing, imagine 1,000 tiny lions all roosting together in this dark and close space. They need to be very good at communication in order to keep the peace inside the roost. So ghost bats use a wide range of vocalizations. And as part of my PhD, I described their complex vocal repertoire, which included 12 social call types, at least. And many of these are actually in the human hearing range, and they sound like insects or birds chirping. Some of these calls are associated with maintaining contact while roosting or foraging. Others are linked with confrontations, fights over food or roost space, with appeasement of that angry bat, mother-pup interactions, and even territorial calls that are reminiscent of birdsong. The calls are not used randomly, so they do peak at different times of the year depending on the season and the social context. And when we compare the structure of the same calls among different roost types, we found that there was structural differences where calls from individuals within the same roost were more similar than those from other roost sites. And this wasn't fully explained by their genetics or by differences in morphology. And so that indicates that another social driver is acting upon the call structure. I'll just play you a short snippet of what a typical roost sounds like. So gosbats require an interconnected landscape of different roosts and productive foraging areas. They use subterranean structures for all of their life stages, and then they use different tiers of roosts at different times of the year for different purposes. So males and females congregate in permanent roosts to mate, indicated by the black icons here. And then after mating season, most males and non-breeding females will disperse to other roost sites, including regularly used roosts, which are indicated by the brown icons, the dark brown icons, and they may only be suitable at certain times of the year. And then occasional roosts, which is the light brown icon, which are less ideal but work well short time and are used for dispersing across the landscape. So between, if they want to move between some of these more permanent roosts and the black icons. Females are philopatric to their natal roost area, and so they remain or return to the area where they were born to breed. And gene flow tends to be male mediated. So the males move much further and have been recorded over 100 kilometers from their original capture roost. Pregnant females, they have very low reproductive rates. So most females tend to be reproductively active by 2 years old. And they only have one pup per year. So quite a slow turnover. Foraging sites are regularly 3 to 8 kilometers from the roost, with recorded maximums of up to 26 kilometers from the roost in a night. Gosbats will often visit multiple of these roost sites or multiple foraging areas within one night and are known to repeatedly visit the same sites and use the same flyways between these sites. But this landscape that the gosbats use, this interconnected landscape, is that they've been using for thousands of years, is rapidly changing, resulting in population decline. So with fewer than 10,000 individuals and a projected decline of 10% over 3 generations, the species is listed as vulnerable to extinction under the EPBC Act. At roost sites, reworking of old mines and development of new mines can result in the removal, disturbance, and alteration of natural and mine roost sites. Human visitation is a problem because bats are very sensitive to disturbance at their roost sites. So visitation by tourists, cavers, fossickers, and even researchers can result in roost abandonment when not done carefully. There's been instances of deliberate disturbance of gosbat roosts with the intention to disperse bats or to make roosts unsuitable. And then roosts can also be the site of interactions between introduced species and gosbats. So in the Pilbara region, feral cats have been recorded hunting gosbats at roost entrances, while in the NT, feral pigs take up residence inside caves to get away from the heat of the day. And there's also changes in the surrounding landscape that affect gosbats while away from the roost. Gosbats are, they're predators and they rely on being able to find prey. So when foraging habitat is cleared or simplified, this can make these areas unsuitable for foraging for the gosbat. Land clearing is an obvious example, and it's particularly a problem when it removes large trees from the habitat. So ghost bats need to use those for perching prey for their, or perching vegetation for their perch and ambush strategy. But that habitat can also be degraded more slowly through things like overgrazing by cattle, inappropriate fire regimes, weeds, that kind of thing that impacts their prey communities. And then ghost bats also experience more direct impacts as they fly across the landscape. So barbed wire entanglement is a known risk for ghost bats. Wind turbines, particularly in northern Queensland and in the Pilbara region, may pose a risk either through collision or through, causing a barrier to that movement across the landscape. And then there's prey-related threats. So at least one ghost bat has been recorded eating and then subsequently dying from the ingestion of cane toad poison. We don't have a lot of information on the level of impact of cane toads, but coupled with all the other threats, can have an impact on ghost bats. And this is the range of the ghost bats. So the current range in blue, possible range in lighter blue, and then the previous range in red. And so we can see how vulnerable the species is when we look at its former range in this pink-red color. Ghost bats once occurred across the area much further south around central Australia, but the last confirmed record was in 1961, and they likely disappeared completely by the late 80s, early 90s. We don't know exactly why the species disappeared, but it's likely a combination of those factors we spoke about before, changes to both roost and foraging landscapes, shifts in climate, and moving to a more arid climate, prey reduction and habitat change as a result of that climate change, and then recent pressures since European settlement, change fire regimes, introduce predators, disturbance, and habitat modification. So it's currently very difficult to make conservation decisions about for the ghost bat, and also to accurately assess the impact of developments. And this is because despite, an increase in the number of studies on this species, we have some huge knowledge gaps still around basic ecological information. We do not yet have a clear range-wide estimate of the population size or a good idea of the population trends. We don't fully know how colonies are connected. We lack detail on how they use these roost networks and how they find roosts, and then how foraging landscapes relate to those roosts. And these gaps, it matters to fill these gaps because then we can make more accurate decisions about mining, fire planning, development, recovery planning. And so, the major knowledge gaps at the moment are, population estimates remain uncertain, how we need genetic and movement data to determine population structure, what determines when the ghost bats will use different roosts. Is it just temperature and humidity, or is there more at play? How productive do the foraging areas need to be? And what do those suitable foraging areas look like? So at the moment, we're making these decisions about landscapes faster than we're filling the knowledge gaps needed to conserve the species. So the Macroderma Initiative is a program named after the ghost bat, and it grew from the recognition that no single jurisdiction, no single method, individual sites could not answer these questions that we have. So this is an ARC linkage project, and it officially started in June 2025, and it's funded for 3 years. Its aim is to improve our understanding of the ghost bats' status, population structure, and their habitat needs. And we're going to try and do this by, bringing together multiple approaches, focusing on genomics, on acoustic methods, on telemetry, biomarkers, and long-term monitoring. And so the program is designed to collect this fundamental fundamental baseline info, which then should assist us with predicting, where and when development and species range overlaps, and help us to ID these sites of high conservation importance, which will then allow us to have targeted conservation management for the species, and as a byproduct, allow or assist regulators and industry with making, quicker and more accurate development assessment decisions. And so we have several projects underway under the Macroderma Initiative. I'm just going to focus on one aspect today to give you an example of the work that we're doing. So we've set up a monitoring system at Cohunner Adit in the Pine Creek region, the location of the largest known ghostbat colony. The aim of this part of the project is to monitor seasonal roost use, emergence and return timing, and survival across different demographic groups. We're interested in not just whether the bats are present, but actually how they're using the roost and how this changes over time. So far, we've pit tagged over 100 ghost bats between October 2024 and May 2026. And in late August 2025, then we installed this biomark board antenna at the entrance to Cohunner Adit. And this is powered by solar, this big solar system at the bottom there, and has remote data upload. So I get a nice email every day with all my ghost bat detections. And for the analysis that I'm showing today, we have nightly data from late August when that antenna was installed up until yesterday. And so nearly a full year. But there's some important caveats. So we don't yet have data for July, and we also have less data for that August and also for this month. So we'll just interpret those months cautiously. But even with those caveats, this system has given us the ability to look at this much more fine-scaled use of this roost, instead of the general fly-out counts that we would take usually. So to generate this individual-based data, we first need to capture and tag the bat. So at Cohunner, ghost bats are captured using a combination of mist nets and an acoustic lure. The acoustic lure is one of their own calls that they're particularly attracted to. Once captured, each bat is placed into an individual calico bag before processing. For each bat, we then collect standard demographic and morphometric information, so including sex, age class, weight, condition, and body measurements. And then we collect a small wing biopsy punch for genetic analyses, which will help us to link our monitoring work to the broader population genetics. Each bat is then fitted with a small RFID pit tag, essentially the same type of microchip that's used for other types of monitoring studies. And once tagged, the bat is then automatically detected every time it flies through that antenna at the roost entrance. And then after processing, bats are released at the capture site. I think I have a video of a happy bat getting away from us. So this then allows us, to get these repeated detections of individuals through time without having to recapture them. So I use linear mixed models to test which factors influence the first emergence from the roost and then the return, the last return before sunrise. And the model included sex, month, moon illumination, whether the moon was up 2 hours after sunset or 2 hours before sunrise, and rainfall totals. And then I included interactions between sex and month and between moon illumination and moon up status. And then individual bat ID was used as a random effect to account for repeated detections from the same bat. So the first pattern that I'll show you is on the emergence timing. So when the bats first leave the roost in the evening and how this differs between males and females. So here emergence time is shown as minutes after sunset. So higher values equals bats that are emerging later in the night. The solid lines show the model predictions and the open circles are the observed monthly means. we found that there was a significant interaction between sex and month, which means that the difference between males and females wasn't constant throughout the year. In some months they were relatively similar, but then in others it was quite different. And so particularly around August, females emerged much later than males. And so biologically, this is really interesting because pups are born around July to August. So during this period, females may be carrying pups or, caring for young, and that can affect when they may leave the roost and how willing they are to move through the landscape. So one possible interpretation is that they're less maneuverable as they exit the roost when they're carrying a pup, and so they delay in order to, avoid that peak period of raptors hanging around while they're less maneuverable. The next factor we'll look at is moonlight. So the x-axis is moon illumination from the new moon through to the full moon, and the y-axis shows the predicted emergence time in minutes after sunset. And so the important part is that the effect of moon illumination depends on whether the moon was actually above the horizon in the 2 hours after sunset. And when the moon was above the horizon, fuller moon conditions were associated with emerging later. So bats emerge nearly 2 hours later under the full moon compared to nights with no moon. But when the moon was not above the horizon, the effect of illumination was much weaker, which, makes sense. And this may be, ecologically, this could again be another predator-prey trade-off. Ghost bats, brighter conditions might aid the ghost bat with actually hunting, but then it might also make them susceptible to predators. And so, obviously at this stage, we can't really separate that, but it's an interesting pattern from this one. Rainfall also affected emergence timing. So total rainfall on the x-axis and emergence time on the y. And so bats on wetter nights, bats emerged from the roost later. And you can see the confidence intervals at the end of this graph are quite wide, so we'll interpret that cautiously. But this is likely because the bats are, it's difficult to fly and to echolocate when it's raining, so they'll delay that emergence and then come out once the rain has passed. Now I'm going to switch over to when they're returning, so when they're coming back to the roost for the last time before sunrise. So y-axis is minutes from sunrise. So now it means that the higher values indicates when bats are returning earlier in the night. And return timing also varied throughout the year. And there was evidence that males and females differed according to months. Both sexes tend to return earlier from around March to June than in other parts of the year. And this timing overlaps with the mating season for the ghost bat, particularly around April to May. And so one possible interpretation is that it's, linked to social or reproductive behavior. For example, males, they benefit from returning to the roost earlier in order to defend space. And then females may be returning earlier during this period if mating activity is occurring in the roost. And then in June, females appear to return earlier than males, which is also interesting. But this could be because they're approaching late pregnancy, and that could reflect, some constraint on hunting and needing to go back to the roost earlier. And the moon effect on return timing was a little bit more complicated than the emergence one. So bats returned earlier on brighter moon nights, but only when the moon was below the horizon. So what is that about? One possibility, let's try and explain it right. One possibility is that this moon phase is acting as a proxy for broader nighttime light conditions, or for conditions earlier in the night rather than just the light environment immediately before or during return. It could also be that just this factor doesn't explain this very well. So moving on to rainfall. So rainfall also influence return timing, but in the opposite direction to emergence. So again, the higher the number, the earlier that they returned. And so on wetter nights, bats return to the roost earlier in the night than on drier nights. And so coupled with the finding from their emergence, with them leaving later during wetter nights, this means that their kind of foraging period is condensed on these very wet nights, and they spend more time inside the roost. So in summary, timing changes throughout the year. Males and females differ in some months, and environmental conditions like rainfall and moonlight shift as bats leave and return. Rainfall is particularly important because it compresses the foraging window, and moonlight mattered, especially for emergence when brighter nights delayed departure. We'll continue to monitor the site over the coming years and are likely to gain hopefully many more great insights from this system. All right, that's enough plots for today. I want to now introduce you to two new PhD students who have joined the Macroderma lab in April this year, and the team is growing. Fernanda Gual-Suarez is a biologist from Mexico, and she has worked with South American carnivorous bats, and her PhD will focus on the foraging and roosting ecology of the ghost bat. And Bryony Hitchcock moved over from New Zealand to join us, where she was working on the Kakapo conservation program. And Bryony will focus on the ghost bat's population size and structure using genetic methods. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you're all still awake, not like this very tired, yawning ghost bat. I'd like to thank the Australian Research Council and our Macroderma Initiative partners, and all the field mentors and traditional owners and field teams and everybody who allowed access and collected data. Happy to take any questions.
Nicola, that sounds fantastic, isn't it? It's really interesting, you sort of natural, sort of life history, natural history, or sort of foraging ecology of that has been discovered. You started off the talk talking about how Macroderma was developing conservation and management. Can you just explain a little bit about how the work you've done in the life history movement relates to conservation management?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so often we get questions with, let's say, for example, development around, when can we mine, or when can we clear that's not going to impact the ghost bats, or how close can we get, or is there any sensitive periods, and those kinds of things. And often, we say the typical, well, pups are around, avoid that period, but there's probably finer sensitivities that are going on in the roost that we need to be aware of. And with Cohen-Arada being the most significant colony of the ghost bats, it's often used as like the reference site. So like the more data we can collect on that site that can be compared to other sites, the better. But what Fur and Bryony will do in terms of getting better baseline population information, and determining how ghost bats choose roost, what the impact is if one of those even occasional roost is removed from the landscape and it stops that movement across the landscape, isolates different colonies. That will be really important information for that conservation planning and impacts. Yeah.
So in the map of their population, there's this massive gap. So there's this population in Northern Kimberley, and then there's population in Pilbara.
Yeah.
Why are there no ghost bats in the middle?
No caves. They're completely reliant on roost sites, and then they'll expand out from their foraging areas. But at some points, it's just too far for them to move across the landscape. It's too arid. There's not enough prey available for the species. So yeah, first and foremost, it's where the roosting spots are that decides.
A related question. So what are your thoughts about the net effect of mining on ghost mount populations? Related to that, are miners being, or the mining industry being encouraged to leave mine shafts at particular places for ghost mounts?
Yeah, so I guess it's tricky to determine the net effect. If we look at, say, the Pine Creek region, where there's lots of historical mining has happened, that population is, you know, mostly supported by those artificial mine routes now. But the bit that's difficult to disentangle is, are they reliant on that because of impacts on natural roosts in the surrounding area? So now, you know, they have to then uptake on this one. But, you know, definitely ghost bats have kind of found a way to utilize some of these disturbances in these mine roosts by occupying these sites. So in some areas, you know, bats have benefited, ghost bats have benefited from it, but we can't truly say whether they're just using them because they were impacted in other ways, like they're still not ideal. And then in terms of whether, you know, mines are being required to protect roost sites, there's a lot more regulation now. There's a lot more need for different proponents to collect their own data prior to doing things, and there's a real lean away from disturbance of any natural roosts. But in terms of historical mine roosts, there tends to be still a little bit more leeway in terms of if the proponent can justify that their population is only or their colony is only like a small percentage of the larger population, which is where these questions come in as to, like, you know, if you lose those 50 bats, what is the impact on the population? So it's moving in the right direction, but, you know, as always, it can be improved.
Thinking so much about protecting known roost sites.
Oh, yes.
Or new mines. Leaving future potential roost sites.
Yeah, like, it's not so much included as a condition, but there's some mines now that are exploring the idea of purposefully building artificial roost sites that meet these conditions. But I guess we're still in that gray area where we're trying to make sure that that's not used as a reason to then disturb a known roost by replacing it with an artificial roost. Some developers will kind of include a condition saying, you know, when we're finished, we'll leave it open, we'll make it safe for humans. You know, we'll keep humans out, but we'll leave it open for bats. But yeah, I think we don't yet fully understand why bats choose certain roosts already to be able to say, oh yeah, that's great, that's a great condition, you know. Yeah.
Thanks, Nicola. I was really interested in the social dynamics of the species, and I was wondering, with your data, the tagged bats, whether or not you've had a chance to look at, are there social interactions happening with exiting and entering the tags? Are there pairs or groups that are exiting and emerging at the same time, or is it like a mass thing that just everyone's going roughly at the same time, or are there individual sort of group?
We haven't looked into it yet, but we are hoping to look into those kind of kin relationships, and like Brian, you might delve into that a bit. You know, when the juveniles are young, it's kind of been assumed that they will follow their mothers for a certain period of time. And with the genetic data we're collecting as well, both from when we trap bats and then from the pit type bats, hopefully we can look at how those kind of kin relationships work. But there is often like interesting social stuff happens at the entrance. You know, some bats will kind of hang around and chirp at the entrance while others fly out, and like they're a sentry kind of on the outside, looking for any, you know, disturbances, any dangers. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to delve into that more. Caroline?
I was just wondering how, well, if you know yet, how often you have the bat that leaves but then doesn't come back.
Yeah, it
So
does
what time
happen.
Go out and come back, or is it, what's the percentage?
Yeah, it's most commonly bats will leave and come back. Some bats will leave and come back multiple times in the night. So it'll be interesting to see, whether that's like an individual thing or, again, weather or moon related or what. Some bats do leave. So the juveniles that we've captured, we tend to detect them for a while, and then once it kind of gets the weaning time, particularly the males, we don't tend to pick them up again, so they've likely dispersed somewhere. And some seem to, disappear for a night and then come back. And it's a little bit tricky. So for this study, I kind of subsetted the data for bats that only had a complete bout. So we had an in and an out, but because we only have one antenna, you're kind of determining whether it's an in or an out based on a set of rules. So, is it at a reasonable time for them to be coming in and out? So when you just have, like one time detection, then it gets a little bit more tricky to determine, is that bat coming back from somewhere that they're, or are they just leaving and not coming back? So a bit more disentangling for that stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
That's great.
Thank you.
Just out of interest, what's the sexual ratio at covenant? Because apparently it doesn't vary between the years, but between across the years. And the second question, how do you constrain research your impact? The work that you're doing on potentially disturbing bats on.
Yeah, it's tricky. So in terms of the ratio, it's been reported as 50-50 in older publications. It likely changes. We don't have the exact kind of data yet, but it likely changes over the year. During mating season, it's probably close to 50-50, and then as the dry season progresses, males will head off, and non-breeding females, there's probably more females hanging around in there, and then as the wet season comes on again, individuals congregate again. When we're trapping, we tend to catch a bit more females than males at Kohenar. And we tested the acoustic lure, and it seemed to be like equally attractive to males and females. So it's hard to tell whether that's an accurate ratio. But yeah, it's a really interesting site because it's used permanently. It's really important site and used for all those different life stages for the species. In terms of avoiding researcher impact, we do as much as we can. We try to, keep an eye on if we're having any impacts. But for example, when we're luring them, we do that at least 100 meters away from the roost. So we remove that disturbance from the roost site itself. And we, if we have a site where we have internal equipment, we tend to wait until after that exodus of bats and then go in and maintain the equipment and leave and keep those kind of checks to a minimum, only doing that, every few months or so. And yeah, we're not measuring it yet in a like kind of targeted way. With the PID tag data, that might be able to tell us a little bit about, in terms of, like, we can see that the high majority of bats, once they're PID tagged, go directly back to the roost or return that morning to the roost and continue to use it. But it's tricky, I guess, in terms of accessing the roost, whether you're causing some less detectable impact. So like with the southern bentwing bats, and they had reported that, using bright light increased activity for like a long period of time after the researchers had left. So we also, keep light to a minimum. But those finer scale things that might, affect energy use or breeding success, we really have to keep an eye on.
I've got some questions online. Do you have any ideas why you have reduced data from June and August? Do you think it's something related to the bats, or do you think it's something related to your food?
It's just because we have less days, less nights. So the equipment was installed in late August. So we have, like a week for the data at the end of August, and then we're just halfway through June. So we don't have a full month worth of data. So that's it. Yeah.
I also had a question about
I guess similar to what we were just talking about, the percentage of tagged individuals that have remained at this roost is dispersing.
Yeah. Off the top, so we've tagged over 100 bats, and we continue to detect 76, 77 bats now. Some of those have headed off for a while and have come back. And the majority who have left are those male juveniles, but also some adult males. So because we haven't got like a full year of data as well, like maybe they'll pop back up again.
I've got my own question. How confident are you in your detection within the square?
Yeah, it's pretty sensitive. So we've done, the hole is quite small, thankfully, and right in the center, you can detect the pit tag really readily as that approaches, or as the human with a pit tag approaches and goes through, and you get multiple tags. So yeah, it's a good site for it, and it's been sensitive. The one thing that might be happening where we're not detecting them is that, Kohinoor may possibly have an alternative exit that is not readily used, but maybe a few bats could use it. And so, they might be slipping through, and that's where that kind of determining whether they're ins and outs kind of gets a bit tricky, because they could have just exited another hole and then came back in the front.
Yeah. Set up a second one and then look at timing between the two sensors.
We could, but it's very expensive. So this setup at Kohinoor is the kind of the peak kind of setup you can have, because we want it to be reliable and send us the data and everything. But if we wanted to install another antenna, they're 7 to 8 grand to add that on. And also the antennas can interact with each other and cause a lot of noise. So you would need to have it, quite a bit inside. We tend to have some difficulties with the mine giving us permission to access and stuff because of health and safety. Yeah. Yes.
Thanks. In your introduction about the project, you mentioned hormone.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So we have Tamara Keeley from University of Queensland as a partner, and she has done a lot of work on using scat hormones to look at reproductive status, and also more recently looking at stress in bats. So the reproductive hormones, she's demonstrated that you can detect different changes that would indicate that there's a maternity roost present. So at some of those new sites that we might find, we had to collect scats and determine that through just ghost bat scats, which would be nice and non-invasive. In terms of stress, cortisol is more tricky because, obviously you don't know what the cause of the stress is. Is it you that's causing the stress? Is the population just overly stressed? So at the moment, I think she's working on getting that baseline data. But yeah, it'd be nice to be able to use something non-invasive like that again with scats to look at health of colonies.
Lovely. Wow, let's thank
And just before we head off to morning tea, we're going to have a few weeks break now for dry season, school holidays and things. So just keep an eye out on your emails or online for when our next seminar will be happening. But otherwise, yes, enjoy the rest of your day.